Ferrari prices have been falling for the last 1.5 years. But does this mean that you should avoid Ferraris if you care about values? The situation seems to be worse than ever. Also, segments that continue to increase while the rest of the market tanked are down now, putting basically the whole mid-engine segment in the red. Some could say that right now is the worst moment to buy a Ferrari, but this isn't necessarily true. On the contrary, stick around to find out why. We'll first dive into the latest price trends for the mid-engine market and compare them to the rest of the market. Over here we have the price trend for the F8 split by the Spiders and the Coupes. The trend is highly correlated to the market trend, so be prepared to see this pattern a lot. Prices increased till the beginning of 2022 and have been declining ever since. Compared to last year, Spiders are down by 9.5% or $50,000, and for the Coupes this is 7.9% or $33,000. Pretty normal numbers. Moving on to the 488, we can see the topping pattern even more clear. Prices surged in the pandemic, topped mid-2022 and have been declining ever since. Compared to last year, the 488 Coupe lost 8.7% or $22,100, and for the convertible this is 8.2% or $24,600. Numbers that are in the same ballpark as for the F8. If we continue with the SF90, we can see that prices have been falling since its introduction, but there are also some positive things going on over here. SF90 started to depreciate less quickly. You can see that since the summer of 2023, the trend flattened slightly. For the year-over-year decrease, this means that we arrive at minus 16.6% or $129,000. Still a high number, but a tad better than the 19% or $170,000 between March 23 and March 22. Moving on to the 458, we can see that also the last naturally aspirated member of the family decreased from the market top. Coupes are down by 5.4% or $11,300 compared to last year, and for the Spiders this is only 3.9% or $10,000, the lowest rate we've seen so far. Especially the low mileage Spiders, so the ones with less than 14,000 miles did well. They are then also the main driver behind the slight flattening of the trend that you can see over here. If we continue with the automatic F430s, we can see a completely different trend. We can see a similar run-up as for the slightly newer models, but the decline doesn't really exist. Values remain stable for an exceptionally long time and only dipped during the most recent 3 months. This is a significant development that we'll soon also see in the 360 market. A consequence of this recent dip is that values are now down by 3.5% or $5,000 compared to 1 year ago. Not a major decrease, but a clear break with the recent pattern. Continuing with the 360s, we can see a similar pattern as that we saw in the F430 market. An increase followed by a strong price development. Also here we can see a drop in the last 3 months, but this drop is the result of an increase in high mileage cars. Correcting for this, we arrive at a loss of 4.1% or $4,300, slightly less than what we saw in the F430 market. Now the smaller the market, the more difficult they are to analyze. The price changes are then more often than not the result of changes in the market composition and do not reflect an actual price change. That's then also the reason that we'll only look at the automatic Spider F355 market. The Coupe and the Targa markets are simply too small. Now looking at the price trend, we can see that values have been fluctuating between $100 and roughly $125,000. Compared to last year, prices are down by 0.8%. However, as you can see from the large confidence interval, there is a lot of price uncertainty in the market, and therefore also in this change. To get an impression of the trend, it's more valuable to look at the development of the interval than at the median prices. Are you still with me? We almost covered all trends. Only the special versions are missing, so let's cover them quickly. But we'll only look at the ones with sufficient supply. Starting with the F430 Scuderia, a small market, it is again important to focus on the confidence interval. Prices did really soar during the pandemic and topped in 22. Just like in the rest of the market. Since then, values have been stable. The increase that you see here is the result of a change in market composition. The actual price change was plus 0.7% during last year, so basically flat. The same applies to the 458 Speciale Coupe market. A massive surge followed by a flat development. Compared to last year, we're looking at a drop of approximately 4.5%, and that's in the same ballpark as the drop for a normal 458. The 488 Pista market is the only special market with decent supply. And looking at this, we can see that especially the coupes were relatively stable. Correcting for changes in the market composition, coupes lost 1.5% or $8,000. Spiders, however, are down by approximately 6%, so they lost slightly more, but this could be a result of the slightly larger increase that we saw during 2022. At the moment, the gap between the two models is again at an average width. That were a lot of numbers. So let's pull them now all together into one graph so that we can compare the depreciation rates of the various models. Over here we have now the yearly loss rates for all the models that we covered. And this shows that the numbers are actually quite intuitive. At the bottom we find the newest models, which, as could have been expected, had the highest depreciation rates. These are the SF90, F8 and 488. The SF90 lost around 17%, and for the F8 and 488 this is between 8 and 9%. Moving up, we can see that most older mid-engine cars lost between 3.5 and 5%. The differences among them are only small. At the top we find the F355 and F430, the only cars for which prices were stable. Yet, as we saw, these two markets are small, so don't put too much emphasis on the exact rate. So are these numbers high or low? To apply these labels we need to compare the rates to the rest of the market. Over here we have the US year-over-year price changes for almost all cars that feature on my channel. On the horizontal axis we have the price change compared to last year in percentages, and on the vertical axis we have the number of cars to which this change applies. Now the average decrease during last year was 7.4%, and most cars lost between 12 and 3%. So this means that the majority of the mid-engine Ferraris lost less than the market average. Only the 488, F8 and SF90 lost more. So all in all, this is a good result. Now up until now, we saw that the price trends for almost all relatively modern mid-engine Ferraris are pointing down. Even the trends for the older cars like the 360 and the F430 started to show some signs of weaknesses after they were stable for a long time. In other words, the situation seems to be worse than ever. But this doesn't necessarily mean that you should avoid these cars as a buyer who cares about values. There are three reasons for this. First, the market is not crashing at the moment. Cars simply tend to depreciate, and that's what's happening in the current market. Flicking through the price trends, we can see that the price decreases are very stable and predictable. Since the market topped mid-2022, the decrease rate didn't change much, and there are no signs of accelerating decreases. On the contrary. Moreover, as we just saw, mid-engine Ferraris mostly lost less than the market average. Second, the real price level might be closer to the pre-pandemic price level than you think. And this shows that, in relative terms, the market is not significantly more expensive than 3 to 4 years ago. Let's have a look at some price trends after inflation correction. We can see, for example, in the 488 market that real prices are more than $20,000 below the ones of July 2020. And this applies to both the coupes and the spiders. In the 458 market, we can see that coupes are at approximately the same level as that they were in April 2022, while spiders are still approximately $10,000 more expensive. And these patterns are visible for basically all models that came after the F430. Remember that we saw earlier that the older models have a different price trend than the newer ones. Values have been stable since the market top. So if we look at the inflation corrected trends for those, we can see that F430s are still significantly more expensive than in February 2020, and that the same applies to a lesser extent to the 360 market. But now then, the third and final reason as to why you shouldn't necessarily avoid the Ferrari market as a buyer who cares about values. It's a very premature development, but the inventory dynamics are slightly optimistic. Looking at the percentage of unsold cars after 3 months, we can get an understanding of the scarcity level in the market. If this number is high, cars aren't selling, and this typically means downward price pressure. Looking at the development over time for the F8, 488 and 458, we can see that the share of unsold cars indeed increased when prices were falling. Value stopped at 56% in the 458 market, meaning that 56% of the cars that were listed for sale in September were also listed for sale in June. Now the development in the last 3 months represents a clear trend break. In all three markets, the share of unsold cars decreased massively. Values are elevated compared to the pandemic price surge, but a continuation of this drop could support the price trend in the near future. Also, when we look at the price change for this unsold inventory, we can see that the situation is the same or slightly better than last year. 458s and 488s are discounted by an average rate of 3%, whereas this used to be 5 and 4% during December 2022. The F8 sits at minus 4%, while this was minus 3% during last year. So all in all, no reason to worry. Let's wrap up and conclude. Prices for most mid-engine Ferraris have been falling during the last 1.5 years, and they continue to do so during the last 3 months. Also, the older models like the 360 and F430 started to show some signs of weakness after a stable period. So should this stop you from buying one if you care about values? Of course, only you can answer that. I'm just here to provide you with the data for it. But based on the data, I think that the Ferrari market is doing relatively well in relation to other markets. Most cars are losing value at the moment. That's only natural. But the price decreases in the mid-engine Ferrari segment are mostly lower than the market average, and prices are falling at a stable pace. F8s and 488s are falling slightly quicker, but not at crazy rates, while the SF90 is a clear outlier. Furthermore, when it comes to the models after the F430, we saw that the inflation-adjusted prices are lower or at the same level as before the pandemic. And this shows that the market isn't as overinflated as it used to be. Finally, we saw some encouraging developments in the inventory data. The share of unsold inventory decreased a lot in the last 3 months. On a standalone basis, it's definitely not enough to state that prices will fall less quickly in the future, but it definitely helps to support the argument that the price decrease is unlikely to accelerate. And with that, we arrived at the end of this video. Now, if you enjoy this data-driven way of analyzing car markets, but would like to see a video for a different car, head over to my channel. Over there you'll find data-driven market analysis for a large variety of cars. Can't find the car you're looking for? Let me know the name of the car down below in the commenting section. Once there are enough requests for a certain car, I'll make a video about it. As always, thank you for watching, and I hope to see you next week for a new video.